Lesson 1. Love. What is it really? Contemporary definitions of love in psychology and neurobiology. Love is one of those words we all know. Yet, each of us understands it a little differently. We can speak of it lightly or with gravity, with hope or with caution. But the more often we try to define it, the more it eludes simple definitions. For decades, scientists have been trying to capture love in the same way other mental phenomena are studied, by analyzing its elements, sources, and effects. And although we know more about it today than ever before, it's still difficult to speak of a single, universal definition. The psychology of love posits that it is a complex construct consisting of various components: emotional, cognitive, behavioral, and physiological. One of the most well-known models is Robert Sternberg's triangular theory of love, according to which love is a dynamic combination of passion, intimacy, and commitment. Depending on the proportion of these three elements, we experience different types of relationships, from infatuation to mature partnership. This model is often cited in psychological education because it shows that love is not a single state, but a process that can evolve. One can start with intense passion and over time transition into a calmer, attachment-based partnership. One can also experience the reverse path, when a stable relationship loses its emotional depth, even though externally everything looks the same. Neurobiology adds further layers. Research indicates that love activates specific neurochemical systems in the brain, primarily related to dopamine, oxytocin, and vasopressin. These substances influence attachment, trust, and the feeling of reward. Romantic love often activates the same brain areas responsible for motivation and addiction, which may explain why falling in love can be so intense and sometimes painful. From a biological perspective, love is sometimes treated as an evolutionary survival mechanism. What we perceive as a strong bond may, in reality, be the effect of a chemical reaction aimed at maintaining closeness, and thus safety, for a longer period. But the fact that biological processes are involved in building relationships does not diminish the value of the feeling itself. Relational psychology proposes a different approach. Love is a co-creative process, something that happens between two people, not just within them. Here, the micro moments of daily life matter: how we react to the other person's emotions, how often we make eye contact, how we say thank you, how we listen when the other person is struggling. Research by John Gottman, an American psychologist known for his long-term analyses of couples, shows that communication style and empathy levels have a strong correlation with relationship longevity. It's not declarations, but specific behaviors, sometimes very small ones, that create the emotional climate of a relationship. Also intriguing is the perspective proposed by Helen Fisher, who conducted research using brain scans of people in love. According to her, romantic love is a reward system, activating the same structures responsible for addiction, which is why it's sometimes so hard to turn off feelings, even when reason tells us we should. For many researchers, love is an umbrella phenomenon, encompassing various emotions and actions whose common denominator is the intention of goodwill towards another person. Yet this goodwill doesn't always look the same. For some, it's presence. For others, freedom. For still others, consistently choosing the other person in everyday small things. And what about those who say that love has ended? Are they talking about a lack of emotion, or a decline in cooperation, trust, care? In that case, is love an emotion, or rather a set of attitudes? In this book, I am not trying to establish a single definition of love. What interests me, rather, is the range within which people understand and experience it. Therefore, we will not consider love here as an abstract concept, but as something real, something that can be experienced, analyzed, and observed in specific life conditions, Because maybe love doesn't require a definition to be significant. Maybe it's enough that we observe it carefully from different angles with openness and respect. And we'll see what moves within us. Love as a social and emotional construct. Is love something that is simply felt, like cold, hunger, thirst? Or is it rather something we learn? Or perhaps, put differently, can one feel something that has been shown, named and described to us by others since childhood? Initially, we don't ask ourselves such questions. When we fall in love for the first time, the emotions seem authentic and undeniable. But as the years go by, observing ourselves and others, we increasingly ask, why do some people love one way and others completely differently? Where does our vision of love come from? Is what we consider normal, close, and proper in relationships sometimes just one of many possible versions? Psychological and cultural studies show that love is not just an emotion, it is also a social construct. What does that mean? It means that our ideas about love are shaped by the culture in which we grew up, by family patterns, language, media, and even economic and political systems. Love is spoken of differently in Japan, differently in Mexico, and differently still in Norway. Psychologist Catherine A. Lutz, who studies emotions across different cultures, emphasizes that emotions are not just biology, but also narratives. In one society, love might be equated with loyalty and duty. In another, with expression and passion. And although the need for closeness appears in every culture, its form and manner of expression can differ dramatically. So, is love universal, or rather relative? Helen Fisher, a researcher of love from a neurobiological perspective, says, love is like a reward system, composed of dopamine, oxytocin, adrenaline, but how we interpret it depends on the society we live in. Some authors even suggest that today's conceptions of love, especially romantic love, are a product of modernity. Just a few hundred years ago, love was rarely considered a prerequisite for marriage. Bonds were built on duty, pragmatism, community. Today, we seek fulfillment, authenticity, and often validation of our own worth in love. But is that wrong? I am not judging. I merely want to point out that our understanding of love is not natural. It is shaped, developed, and subject to change. For example, must love always mean exclusivity? In Professor Deborah Anapol's research on emotionally non-monogamous relationships, researchers discovered that many people are capable of experiencing deep attachment in more than one relationship. This doesn't mean everyone wants to live this way, but it shows that ways of loving are more diverse than we assume. In turn, the experiments of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth on attachment theory demonstrate that our first relationships with caregivers influence how we perceive closeness, trust, and emotional risk. In other words, we learn to experience love long before we begin to name it. It is therefore worth asking ourselves, where did my idea of what love should be come from? Is it my own or adopted? Emotionally, love is also not uniform. For some, it is peace. For others, excitement. For some, unconditional support. For others, mutual motivation for growth. Emotions such as jealousy, longing, tenderness, or frustration are often confused or equated with it. In a study by Shaver et al., 1987, participants were asked what emotions they associated with love. The results? The most common answers were happiness, closeness, passion, but also fear, anxiety, and sorrow. Love can thus be a paradoxical experience, bringing joy and difficulty, a sense of meaning and of being lost. The point is not to evaluate this fact. On the contrary, it is worth accepting it as a starting point for further exploration. Because perhaps love is not one single thing. Maybe it is a collection of different experiences influenced by biology, upbringing, and social expectations. So perhaps it's worth not only asking, do I love, but also, what have I learned about love? And does this learning serve me? Differences between romantic fascination and lasting bond. Is this still infatuation, or is it already love? And if it's love, what kind? Most of us know the feeling, a racing heart, constant thoughts about the other person, slight anxiety, excitement. Romantic fascination is a state that can change the way we see the world. Suddenly, everything becomes clearer, more interesting, more important. But what happens when this state passes? Is it a sign that something is breaking down? Or perhaps, is it simply the beginning of a different stage? Psychological research often distinguishes between romantic fascination, passionate love, and mature, attachment-based love, companionate love. The first is intense, often short-lived, and characterized by the idealization of the other person. The second is more stable, deeper, and less dependent on emotional swings. Barbara Fredrickson, a researcher of positive emotions, notes that falling in love resembles a state of strong activation of the brain's reward system. Dopamine, adrenaline, and sometimes cortisol are released. We are aroused, focused, full of energy, but also more susceptible to cognitive distortions. We often see in the other person what we desire, not necessarily who that person truly is. In contrast, a lasting bond is something that is built over time. It is not based on intensity, but on consistency, security, and mutual trust. This isn't a story about fireworks. It's a story about a quiet, I am here, a presence that doesn't need to prove anything. So is fascination worse than attachment? Both have their place. Romantic elation can be the beginning of something lasting, but it can also simply play the role of an important episode, something that opens, moves, teaches. A lasting bond is not a reward for successful infatuation. It is rather a form of understanding that arises when people decide to continue building a relationship, even though the chemistry no longer works with such force. Neurobiological studies, including Bartels and Zeki 2000, have shown that romantic love activates different areas of the brain than long-term attachment. In infatuation, reward centers dominate. In a bond, structures responsible for attachment and long-term planning. John Gottman, who observed couples in his laboratory for decades, claims that it's not the intensity of emotions that determines the durability of a relationship, but the way people talk, listen to each other, and react to small, everyday signals. Whether someone responds to, "Look at that sunset," that's not a detail. It's a micro-test of closeness. It's worth asking yourself, is what I feel today based on who this person is? Or rather on how I feel around them. What remains when the intensity disappears? Infatuation is an emotion. Love is a relationship. And a relationship, to be close and lasting, needs more than just a spark. It needs space for imperfection, for tender understanding, for enduring together even when grand words are lacking. The point is not to value one over the other. Both states have their dynamics, their meaning. It's more about distinguishing them, not confusing them. Because confusing infatuation with lasting love can lead to disappointment, and confusing attachment with routine, to abandoning something that wasn't dead at all, just calm. Love matures. Sometimes it begins with fascination, sometimes with friendship, and sometimes it surprises us when we expect nothing. But regardless of the path, it's worth observing it. Not just in terms of what we feel, but also what we choose. Love as a process. Biological, psychological, relational. There are moments when love seems self-evident. A single glance, a single sentence, a single touch is enough. But in most cases, especially in long-term relationships, love isn't something you simply have. It's something that is created, something that unfolds, and something that lives in time. So is love a process On a biological level, definitely yes. Neurobiologists indicate that the phases of a romantic relationship have different hormonal profiles. Falling in love is associated with a sharp increase in dopamine and norepinephrine levels. It's a time of excitement, elation, idealization. In turn, the consolidation of a bond, e.g., in the cohabitation phase, activates oxytocin and vasopressin, hormones responsible for closeness, stability, and attachment. Helen Fisher called this the biological code of love, a changing neurochemical system that shapes our emotional and behavioral responses to the presence of another person. Interestingly, some researchers suggest that the brain gets used to the presence of a partner, causing the initial strong reactions to give way to more nuanced forms of tenderness and attachment. This doesn't mean the feeling weakens. It means it transforms. But biology isn't everything. Psychologically, love is also a learning process, learning about each other, but also about oneself in the context of the relationship. We change not only under the influence of events, but also through daily micro interactions, communication style, ways of dealing with conflict, levels of empathy. None of these are set in stone. They can evolve, and with them, love can evolve too. One concept that well describes this dynamic is the adaptive model of love, Finkel, 2014. It assumes that long-term relationships require not only compatibility, but also continuous attunement on the level of emotions, values, expectations. In practice, this means that even the most loving individuals will sometimes have diverging needs. The key is not the absence of difficulties, but the way a couple manages their presence. It's also worth mentioning the concept of dynamic self-regulation of emotions in a relationship, described by James Gross and Barbara Fredrickson. Their research shows that the quality of a relationship depends largely not on whether difficult emotions arise, but on how the couple deals with them over time. Love as a process doesn't mean an absence of tension. It means a readiness to go through it together. And finally, love as a relational process, that is, one that arises between people, not just within them. It's something that is built, often based on rituals, shared histories, cooperation. Psychologists dealing with long-term relationships, including Susan Johnson, creator of emotionally focused therapy, emphasize that a sense of emotional safety is key and that it doesn't stem from declarations, but from repeatable experiences. Research by Sue Johnson and Les Greenberg shows that most couples who describe their relationship as satisfying do not avoid conflicts. On the contrary, they learn to treat them as an opportunity to understand and deepen their bond. And it's not about always agreeing, but about being ready to see each other despite differences. In one conversation, someone asked me, "Is love a decision?" I don't know. But maybe this question can be put differently. Is love something we create day by day and anew? In Gottman's model, there is the concept of an emotional bank account. Every act of care, every gesture, every instance of listening is a small deposit into the relationship account. When the account is full, it's easier to endure difficult moments. When it's empty, even a minor disagreement can shatter everything. Perhaps that's why it's worth thinking about love, not as something you have or lose, but as something you experience, build, transform, like an organism that grows, like a relationship that breathes. Does care arise on its own, or is it chosen? Can we recognize moments when our relationship needs something before a crisis arises? What do we do when love no longer resembles what it was at the beginning? Can we notice its new version? Love as a process is a story that doesn't end with the words, "I love you." It's a series of acts, listening, supporting, learning. It's a conversation that continues, even in silence. It's faithfulness not only to someone, but also to the very process of being together.